Hey, hey,
Hey, Phil.
how you doing?
I am pretty good. How are you?
Good. I've been running around like crazy. Metaphorically, actually, I've not done any running today, but I have just bounced from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and I'm looking forward to just kicking back and relaxing with you. To be honest with you, I'm excited just to have a more relaxed, chill conversation. Like, oh yeah,
No, man, no relaxation here. It's all gonna be happening.
I know we're both really intense people, and we have so many similarities. It's crazy as well. I just know, like, reading a little bit. We're on the same Patreon over at Dirty Rotten Church Kids, and reading some of your bio and some of your blogs and stuff. Like, we both went through like a ministry school, whatever the yeah. We've served and volunteered till the end. Like, we're gonna click on some big stuff today, and it's gonna be intense. But that kind of chills me out on some level. Do you know what doesn't chill me out? Is like, I just had a amazing conversation with these two amazing women. That one of them was in a cult for 18 years, one was in for 30 years, and they're starting this movement to tell people's cult stories, and they're wanting to include people like evangelicals as well, and kind of the whole spectrum. It's called I Got Out, and I'm like, this is awesome, great, let's do a podcast. But 30 minutes, they want to share with me their entire vision. They want to talk to me about my vision. They want to like talk about cults, and I'm like, dude, 30 minutes? I can't tell you my name in 30 minutes. Like, I need time. So I think that's what I find stressful, is like going from meeting to meeting when like you just feel rushed. Like, right, I've got to say the right thing, get it all done. And that's why my podcast's so long. I'm just like, I can't deal with that stress.
No, that's intense. And to switch gears like that, yeah.
You got to soft it, slide into it,
Yeah. None of that here. I have no vision for anything.
There we go. So. Just shooting from the hip all over the place. I love it. I'm excited. This is gonna be great. We'll probably just roll with whatever, and we'll just kind of start and include anything, because I like to include the preamble as well. I feel like it's more casual, it helps people feel a bit more comfortable as well. But say whatever you want, any way you want. Nothing is off the table. There is no way to say things right or wrong, or like, you're good. Just whatever you feel comfortable with. We usually go somewhere between an hour and a half, 2.5 hours. But how are you doing for time? I want to make sure like we're not gonna like eat into like your whole day, or if you've got like a hard time you need to roll out by, or.
No, I'm good.
Pretty chill. Okay.
I don't have anything until 3 o'clock.
We'll feel it out. So we'll probably not get that far. I want to have dinner. So
no, you said we could go as long as it takes. So
I do have.
We're gonna be here.
Some level, I do have like this desire just to like have an epic podcast sometime where I get a few people on and we just talk for hours about crazy stuff. Like, and this could easily be it. Because like, let's dive in though, because I want to know, right, first of all, I know that a lot of stuff on the internet, you're Janice. I know you also go by Janny. Do you have a preference?
Anything except Jan.
Okay, not Jan.
Not Jan. Janice, okay. Jan even, but not Jan. So whatever you're comfortable with, I'm comfortable with.
Cool. Well, now I'm just going to probably get it so in my head not to say Jan. I'll probably say that at some point and be like, shit. Isn't that amazing?
And I will log out like,
just immediately. You say, and then just done. That would be the best podcast ever. Awesome. Cool. Great. Well, I'll probably roll with Jenny because that's what's on the screen, and we can do that. But let's dive into like you initially. Like, I know a lot of people that are listening to my podcast probably have come across your podcast, your website. It's God Is Not Given. But for people that don't know you, give us like just a taster overview. We'll probably dive into much more stuff, but like, who are you and why are you doing what you're doing? Like, no one starts doing what you're doing without a story, right? You don't just go, I know I'm going to do this podcast. I'm going to talk about all this stuff. I'm going to like really challenge all these kind of different big topics. Like, there's some story there, right?
Oh, there's a lot of story. And I am a storyteller. So,
excellent.
So yeah, I feel like I came onto most people's radar as far as evangelicalism and deconstruction, all of that. It's all pretty recent. Like my podcast only started at the end of October 2020. So we're not even 6 months old yet. And so I started my podcast because, I've been listening to a lot of deconstruction-y kind of podcasts, and a lot of it felt like it was coming from like almost like an expert kind of point of view, like talking to people, who've written books about purity culture and women in the, just topics. And for me, I was like, well, I'm really interested in kind of like the day-to-day, because I, grew up in church, was very involved in churches, up until, about 3 years ago. And so most of definitely my family, is all Christian. And then most of the friends that I have are people that I met in church. And so a lot of them are still, still in church, still Christian. So I was just really interested in like, it started out as like, what does it look like from an outside kind of point of view? Like when your friend is deconstructing, what are you thinking? What are you worried about? Like, just how does that look, at that level?
Sure.
So I just want to talk to my friends and just see, because I think, people, when you leave church, they get really worried about that. But, they give you time and space. Oh, she'll figure it out. She'll come back. We're praying for you, all of that kind of stuff. And then with me, and I started kind of like playing with some other ideas and being like, what about this? And what about this? My friends kind of already know. And I mean, I'm an artist, so I think I get away with a lot. And they just kind of expect you to be a little left
a little
of center.
Crazy, weird. It's kind of, the weird artist. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's, of course she would be doing that. But then like, I would just find these things and I'd be like, well, what about this? And we'd be talking about stuff. And I'm like, oh, like we're actually not as far apart as you might think. Or people, I think a lot of things as a Christian, you just don't think about. You're just like, this is the rule, this is whatever. And you just kind of tuck it away and you just live by it and move by it, but you really don't examine it. And so then when you kind of, starting these conversations and be like, well, let's actually think about this. And then just finding out we're actually not as far apart, as you might think. So I was just, having those conversations. So I started the podcast maybe like 2 weeks before, just coincidentally, this whole Hillsong Carl Lentz thing blew up.
Right.
And so it was just kind of like perfect timing for that. So then it didn't, and it's not a anti-Hillsong podcast, but a lot of the people that I know are from, my life in Hillsong.
Sure.
So we do end up talking about that a lot. And that just kind of just provided in for a lot of other people because people were really interested in what was happening with that. So that's how a lot of people came to know me. I had written a blog post about it and about my time in Hillsong and kind of outside of it now. So it's been, just kind of a wild 6 months of just this ever expanding community, of deconstruction and whatever this is. So,
well, who knows what this is, right? As soon as people start labeling it, you're like, okay, sure for you, but no, it's not. That's not what this is. I don't know what it is, but it's not that either. Yeah, it's hard to put a finger, and probably because we're all in very different places as well, right? So like it's such a messy one to figure out. But the beauty is, no matter how far apart we are, you start talking like you're saying, and you suddenly realize, oh, we're not that far apart though. We're actually pretty similar, and we agree on a lot of things. It's incredible. I love there was a study done recently in the US called Perception Gap. You can find it at perceptiongap.us, and it's really interesting where they got all these Republicans to answer questions about what they believe about different topics and different ideas and things. But then they got them to say, how do you think Democrats think about that? And then they answered the same questions. And then they got all these Democrats to answer what they believe and how they think and whatever. And then they said, what do you think Republicans think? And what they found was that both Democrats and Republicans think each other are like so much more extreme than they are. And actually, generally speaking, they kind of believed very similar things. And generally speaking, were like agreeing or saying the same thing a lot of the time. Like they weren't actually even disagreeing. They just thought the other person thought some ludicrous, insane idea, you know, like, and so I do wonder sometimes how we kind of get ourselves in these bubbles where we go, oh yeah, all evangelicals, everyone at Hillsong is this freaking psychopath. And you're like, I lived there for a long time. I wasn't a psychopath. And actually, most of the people I knew aren't psychopaths. And actually, if I can take that lens off and just talk with them, they're probably all in fairly similar places. They just, like you said, they haven't asked the question.
Yeah.
I'm reading, do you know Alice Gretson? She's, so I'm reading her book, Wayward. Just now, I finally got around to it. And there's an amazing bit in the book. She's 13, I think. And she asks her dad, she's like reading through the Bible. And she's like, Dad, if God told you to like just give me over to a crowd to rape me, would you? And he's like, what? Like, are you insane? No, I would never do that. And the mom's like, why would you ask this? And she's like, well, it's in the Bible. That happens a few times. Like, and but what's funny about it is the dad's like, oh, no. We just read it differently. That's not how we read it. It's like Old Testament. But the mother was even more interesting, where she's like, oh, there's rape in the Bible? I'm like, she didn't know there's rape in the Bible. I'm like, that's like one of the main topics of the Bible is like, let's just rape the shit out of everything. Like that's like Old Testament 101. And I'm just amazed again at like, these three people were all on the same page here. No, we're not going to do that. That's a pretty extreme one. So it's quite easy to find us all on the same page. I hope everyone listening would say the same thing. I hope you, Jenny, if you're not on the same page, this is going to be a different conversation. But like, I think most rooms, 99% of the rooms you walk in and say, hey, what do you think about this topic? We're going to get pretty unanimous here. And yet it's easy to read and go, oh, so Christians would be okay with that? Or, oh, so that's something that they believe? And it's like, no, we just kind of ignore that. Oh, okay, that's weird, but I can jive with that. I would ignore that shit if I had to be Christian and I didn't want to give over for my daughter to be raped. I agree. Let's ignore that passage. It's so interesting. It's fascinating. So how have you found those kind of conversations when you do bring up stuff that people are ignoring, are kind of like, do you find that kind of destabilizes them a bit? Like they suddenly are like, oh, I haven't looked at that and I'm not comfortable with the fact I haven't looked at that.
Not so much, because I don't like I don't generally approach it like today's topic will be, and we are going to talk about, and why do you believe, this? Like it just really comes up in just normal kind of, conversation. And I'm not, to my friends, I'm not overly antagonistic.
Sure, you're not trying to get them.
Right. Yeah. There are other people online who I do try to get often.
Right.
But in conversation, and a lot of it centers around, honestly, like around a lot of like marriage and relationships, kind of things. Cause I have friends who are Christian and in the church, but also sexually active, but also still, telling other people not to be. And also, not being open about that with their church community, but like being open in our friend group. So then like, it's just interesting to me. So then I'm not coming at it like, well, you say this, but you're doing this. But I just like to talk about these ideas. And I find just like, and I understand it. Coming from that environment, you and I know cognitive dissonance well. I know what it is to think one thing, or to think I'm supposed to think one thing, but to be acting in another way. So I find in a lot of these conversations, like I'm really trying to add to almost like stabilize, and to try to be like, okay, like I know you say you think this, but you're doing this and I'm seeing this and it's okay. Like I'm fine with it. Like it's not, there's no judgment here. I think we're taught to judge each other and to judge ourselves so harshly.
Yeah.
So I'm just really fascinated in these conversations with just kind of putting the action on the table and just like letting it sit there and let it be okay. And, giving my perspective, well, I think it's fine because, whatever, and almost just offering people another way to look at it. Like, even if they're not ready to wholeheartedly agree with me yet, that, oh, this might be fine. Like, it just, Christianity, you're just planting seeds, right? You're just dropping thoughts there. And, people can pick them up, as they want to. So, I mean, with my friends, it's been good. I don't come at them antagonistically. They don't generally come at me that way. Like, occasionally there'll be little things in conversation. For my birthday, we did this small dinner. And one of my friends, before we go to eat, she's like, oh, we got to bless the food. And she's like, oh no, I guess, because Janice isn't Christian anymore. And then I was like, well, I haven't. Oh, I'm not Christian. Like, oh, you decided that. Like, I'm not.
Right. Yeah. And you've decided I really don't like blessed food. I want my food non-blessed, please.
Right. And actually, I was like, yeah, I really appreciated that moment because it was like, oh, like we're changing here.
Sure.
Because that's actually not. Yeah, I don't. I'm not anti, but also that's an extra 2 or 3 minutes because I knew it was going to be.
My food is getting cold.
Yeah. Because it wasn't just going to be blessing the food. Like, this is the thing in Christianity where also it's like, oh, we want to thank you for Janice and she's so great. And, and say all those things. Yeah. So then one of my other friends like stepped in and I was like, oh, like, because that's something I've been thinking a lot about with prayer. How we would use prayer to hide things we want to say about other people.
Mm-hmm.
Bad
it's
and
kind of
good.
Like passive aggressive kind of
right.
like, yeah.
But even good things, it's way more vulnerable, to say, oh, Janice, like I'm glad that you were born. I really love you, as opposed to, oh God, I just want to thank you for Janice. I just want to thank, just having to take that extra step to actually say what you think of people.
Wow.
Without hiding it. Yeah. Like, and try it. Like, it's awkward to just tell your friends what you think of them without like hiding it in prayer, to just say, oh, like, I really love you. I really am glad that you're here. You are such a good part of my life. Like, so it's been more of that with my friends, like just becoming more honest and more vulnerable and just saying things and not hiding behind God. Like, oh, I feel like God wants to tell you. No, I feel like I want to tell you, or I think, whatever. So
I love that.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I think so. The ministry school thing I was a part of was Bethel out in the West Coast, and like there's a lot to be said about that in a whole host of different ways. But one of the things I do actually think helped me grow tremendously, it relates to that, where they would have this kind of practice where they were like, look, if you go up to some stranger and you say, I've got a prophetic word for you, because they're like all about the supernatural and things like that, and you hear from God and then you speak over something, like, it's kind of creepy, right? So even this evangelical movement, we're like, it's kind of creepy. Just go up to someone and say, God gave me a word for you. You're this, or whatever. So they were like, how about you kind of just do it kind of covertly? You don't need to tell them God said that. Was just really powerful and impactful. So we got really good at like going up to people, whether we knew them or not, and just being like, hey, I think you're incredible. I think you're so great at this. You're really gifted at that. And I so appreciate that. And I think that's going to really set you up for success in your life. And I really look at that, and because as you're saying that, I'm like, I have no problem looking at someone in the eyes and going, I love you. I think you're amazing. I'm so thankful for who you are. But I have had for all my life leading up to kind of probably that kind of time in my life, it kind of pivoted. And so it's so interesting that like, yeah, you're right. We hide behind prophetic words, behind prayer, behind these kind of mechanisms where we not even to say the passive aggressive, and Lord, we just pray that as Janice eats her meal and enjoys her time with her Christian friends, that she would remember that, that it's you, Lord, that gives us happiness, or, right? It's like, fucking shut up, Julie, right? Or whatever, right? I get it. I'm not Christian anymore, right? I'm not being convicted right now, but I do think you're not coming to my next birthday party, right?
Right.
Or whatever. Yeah. But it can be that thing of like, oh, and God, I so love Janice and she's so amazing. I love her passion. And she always teaches me to think more about other people. Like that can be kind of awkward, I think, for a lot of people. You're right. And it's such a beautiful mechanism for those that can't do that? I think it would be great if we could all get to that place. Maybe we could look our friend in the eye and tell them why we like them.
Just tell them why I like you, without God forcing me to. Like,
yeah, I'd never thought of that before, though. That's really interesting. So fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, because Hillsong is not. I mean, I think a lot of people would be surprised to find out that Hillsong is like charismatic, is Pentecostal,
right. It's charismatic with a seatbelt, though, right? Like, it's like, very much. We are not going to be way too out there. We've got an image to uphold. Like, we'll be charismatic, but let's do this organized, subtly, behind this closed door. Yeah. If this is going to get crazy, there's a room for that. Right. We go through here. Like,
right. Yeah. But they would have like these sessions of, like just giving people prophetic words, and just going up and, just saying whatever God is saying to you. And now I'm just like, oh, like you're just giving people your opinions, like, which is fine.
Sure. Yeah.
But like, just say that, like, don't, we're hiding everything.
Right.
In the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
But so I grew up in a very, very Pentecostal, very charismatic, very not orderly in fashion. Church started at 10. You knew that. When it would end, who knows?
Nice.
And so people are speaking in tongues and giving words and interpretations and all of that. So I always thought, oh, like it's just not my spiritual gift, because I just not into it. Like I just don't.
Yeah.
I've never been into the overly spiritual, ooky spooky stuff. I'm just like, like I've never really liked it.
Did you ever have the thing of like, because there's a thing of, I know this is for me growing up in that world, charismatic, people falling over and people praying in tongues. And there's this thing of like, well, no one's saying I'm a bad Christian because I'm not doing this, but I'm pretty sure I'm a bad Christian because I'm not doing this. Like, this is definitely, the norm is falling over and being weird. I know that like at school, that's not the norm, but here I am not normal. I'm like sitting here, like someone just laid hands on me and nothing happens. And all I could think about was like, his shoes look really nice. Like, we should not be giving the kind of offerings we're giving this guy because those shoes are nice. Like that's my thought process as he's laying hands on me. I'm trying really hard to be reached by God and nothing's happening. Like, did you ever kind of straddle that kind of whole world of like not really fitting in, wanting to fit in, and then all the kind of emotions and feelings in between of going, what's wrong here? Is it my sin? Is it my belief? Is it, how did you navigate that? Because I've been in those environments and it's intense, right? Try living at Bethel for 4 years and never once falling over, right? I went back a few times just to pity the person. They seemed committed and they weren't moving on. And I'm like, you know what? I can fall backwards. Someone will catch me. Let's just do it. So trust exercise. I'll go back so you can move on because you need to go to lunch, or whatever.
Right.
But
right.
Apart from that, I was never going to get whacked out or all these kind of weird kind of things that were going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like she talks about that in Wayward too, like her, being in those healing meetings and, things.
Brown.
Right. Yeah. And I was like, ooh, I know that name, Revival of Brownsville. Like, and I was just all these things. I'm like, oh. So I mean, I was in it. And like I spoke in tongues and I probably went down a few times, but it was like, oh, this is what you're supposed to do. And then you're like laying there, like, how long do I have to lay here? How long is realistic for? And just trying to feel something. And I mean, you feel confused, you feel, quite like you're feeling things, but you're not feeling the things you think you're supposed to be feeling. So it's just, and you put it back on yourself, like, okay, this has something to do with me, because all of these other people that I know and that I love and that I trust seem to be having a genuine experience. And if I'm not, then something is blocking that. So what is it, about me? What deep, dark sin has 13-year-old me, keeping me separated from God, and it's, I don't know. I mean, to look back on it now, I'm like, oh, like the whole thing, the only word I can think of is just toxic. I'm like, it's just so deadening. As much as it's supposed to be about, bringing your spirit alive and bringing you to life. No, it's like about killing so much of you, including just your own, self-awareness and being able to say, well, this is what I feel, and this is genuine.
Yeah.
And it's not bad. Like, it just is. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember so many conversations with people where they're like, well, you're over intellectualizing it. You should stop thinking so much. So I'm like, all right, I'll stop thinking. And then I'm like, I'm not really feeling it. And I'm like, well, your feelings can be deceptive. You need to stop worrying about your feeling. I'm like, so I'll stop feeling. And it's like, you're slowly dehumanizing. You don't realize this at the time, but you're
right.
you're learning to like, just kind of devalue all the things that make you you.
Right.
And realize, well, no, I've got to fit in this mold to fit in this world. And that requires apparently no thoughts, no feelings. Apparently those aren't allowed. Whereas I'm sure all those people rolling around on the floor and like whatever, and, doing all the crazy stuff, like I'm sure they were having a wonderful, genuine experience for them based on how they're built and how they're made up and how that kind of spiritual activity engages with them. Like I'm not saying it was fake or anything, even. I'm just saying like how they were built was different to me, and the problem was suddenly, well, then you need to change, like,
right.
because this is a deep spiritual thing from on high, and God wants to do it in the same way to every person. That's why I got you on a line where we don't even really care that you're a human. We just kind of move along and just hit you in the head. Yeah, it's such a weird world. What kind of denomination was that you were a part of?
Non-denominational. Like,
nice.
Yeah, you can't. Like, the pastor that I grew up under, they came out of the AOG.
Right. There are so many non-denominational AOGs, and you know what it is? AOG fees. They're high. They're high. Basically, every church I've ever been a part of or gone to that's a non-denominational ex-AOG church is an AOG church that doesn't want to pay the AOG fees. That's basically the only real difference. Is like, we're the same. We kind of believe all the same things, maybe a couple of things slightly differently, but basically we wanted to keep that extra 10% or whatever it is. I don't actually know the exact amount, but it's just so funny. But yeah, so just you saying, oh, we were a non-denominational AOG, I'm like, oh, I know your church. On some level, on a very deep guttural level, I know your church. I've been in your church. I've experienced your church, and I've never been to that church. I might have, actually, who knows? But yeah.
You didn't. Not that one. Yeah.
No. So what happened from, you being the 13-year-old girl that's not going over in your non-denominational AOG church to, going, I got to go to Hillsong. Like Sydney, that's not where you grew up. Where did you grow up? Where are you from?
Riverside, California.
Okay. Nice. Okay.
So yeah.
So
and people who know, that's a deep cut. So people who know will know, and everybody else will be like, what? How close to LA is that? And it's not. It is,
I've been to Riverside.
Oh, look at you. For what?
What up? I think I spoke in a church there one time. I can't even remember what it was. I used to travel and speak in churches all over the world. And so I have been everywhere. I might have been to your church. I'm not even joking. No,
no, you definitely never came to my church, because we would not have. No, we had maybe 75 people on the books. And
you kind of work through the rota.
Average attendance of 40, 50. I don't know. Like,
what are you saying here? I'm only going to do the big churches of 10,000 people. Yeah, that's me. I'm a big deal. You're definitely overestimating the kind of churches I would go to. I was like, wow, 75. That's a pretty big church. You forget as well, I'm from the UK. The average church in the UK is like 12 people. Like we don't have big churches. A mega church in the UK is like 200 plus, like is a big church. And so we do have huge churches, Hillsong London, probably a big example of a big church, one of the few big churches. But yeah, we don't have big churches. So in America, the small churches, I'm like, well, it's a good, thriving, decent sized church. And Americans are like, we're dying. They should come to Europe and hang out for a bit. If only they knew. Super
inspired. Although, trends are changing here now.
They are. Well, yeah, 75 might be a big church before long.
So the super small church, and we used to, not overtly, I don't know if it was ever, no, it was probably said out loud at some points, but those mega churches, those big churches, they're they're doing something wrong. Like they're not giving the true gospel, because too many people are having a good time, over there. But at some point, the women in my church, the women's ministry, they went to New Zealand for like a ministry trip. And they came back with Hillsong music. So it was kind of like right before, because at that time it was like Maranatha and Integrity music. Like that was like where all the praise and worship was kind of coming from,
right?
Using those tracks and things. And then Ron Canoli was big, and Ron Canoli did something with Hillsong, and it was like him and Darlene Check, did a thing. And so that was kind of like our introduction to Hillsong music. And Hillsong, I mean, you listen back to those, like All Things Are Possible and Shout to the Lord, those early cuts. And now you're like, oh, this is so standard. Like this is so, late 90s, early 2000s Christian-y. But at the time, it was like, ooh, this is
They were doing something really fresh and new. I remember first time listening to Hillsong, especially, what was the youth band? Was it Hillsong? Is it United? Hillsong United. Yeah. Well, I remember as like a teenager, late teens, Hillsong United come on the scene, and we were like, whoa, this is cool. It's not it's not just worship now. This is cool worship. I feel I could listen to this with my secular friends. God, I hope I never did. I can't remember. I'm not massively into music, so I didn't really listen to much music even then. So, but yeah, I really hope not. God. But there was something about Hillsong that was like, I don't know if it's the Australian kind of vibe, that certainly the music was very unique. It didn't kind of like, you could hear a song that you'd never heard before, and you'd be like, oh, this is a new Hillsong one.
Yeah.
Right? There was that kind of like uniqueness to it.
So so they were doing it the best, right? They just came out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, okay, here they are. And so me, as someone who loved music, was part of the worship team at church, but also, very, very Christian. And so, especially with anything to do with the arts, Christians, especially at that time, were very much, if you have this gift, like you have to use it for the Lord, like you have to use it in church, because Christians are so afraid of the world anyway, but especially like the entertainment industry, anything to do with the arts.
Sure.
So yeah, you need to keep this in the church. So at that time, I had already graduated high school and was kind of like, I knew I wanted to be something artistic, but I also knew that I was smart, and it felt like a waste to like be an artist. So I'm like, I have to study something real. But I didn't have a passion for anything real. So I would go to school for a while, get bored, then I would go to work. Work for a while, get bored with that, I'll go back to school. So I was in one of those I'm tired of work kind of phases. And I had gone looking to see if Hillsong was doing anything in the States at the time, and they weren't. But that's when I found out about the college. So I was like, well, yeah, sure, I'll go to school again. And this is like the sweet spot, because it's worship. They're doing it better than anyone. My church can get behind that. I want to go back to school anyway. It's Sydney. That'll be different. That'll probably be good for me. So yeah.
A little different from Riverside, right?
Right. A little bit, slightly different. So yeah, so I'll go there for a year, see what God says, and we'll see what happens there. So I went, ended up staying 4.5 years.
Wow.
And and within the first 6 months, like I knew I could never go back to my old home church. And I knew, when I had to come back those years later, I was like, I knew if I was in California and not at that church, like it would have been an issue. Like those, it just would have been an issue, and just a fight I just didn't feel like having. So I was like, well, I can't live in California, so where am I going to go? And I had a friend that I met at the Bible college, lived in New York. I had visited New York. It's like, I loved it. So like, that's where I'm going. Yeah. Moved to New York in October 2009. And then, they announced Hillsong NYC February 2010.
Yeah.
And I was already part of the little connect group that became that first connect group. So day zero, Hillsong NYC. I was in it,
right there,
and of it.
Yeah. Wow. How was your experience of Hillsong in Sydney? Because, you know, the way you described growing up in your church, you know, you obviously were into it enough to kind of make it through, you know, life in that church. You're Christian, you find out about Hillsong, you head to Hillsong, but like there was some disconnect there as well of like, oh, I'm not connecting with some of this like extreme kind of like Pentecostal, charismatic, the manifestations, external kind of stuff. Like, what was it like going to Hillsong for you? Like, did you suddenly realize, oh gosh, this is different, right? Because it isn't so extreme and outward and a lot of its kind of stuff. Like, did it click more with you? Or, you know, did you just generally speaking like Hillsong, or did you have your own issues or questions while you were there, or did it kind of just work?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Like I remember getting to Hillsong and going to like one of my first services there, and then just being like shocked because they were playing like secular music like in the lobby, like before you go in. And so it would just be these things that would happen just the way they would do things. And then I would like, you know, check myself. Oh, okay, I'm more religious than I thought I was because, you know, this music bothers me. Why does that bother me? And so, I mean, Hillsong is very intentional about being attractive. And so I had to deal with a lot of, you know, kind of my own small church, some of its insecurity and some of just the way you were taught. Like I said, you've been taught to kind of demonize big churches. And so you're just on the lookout for how is this worldly? How are they blurring the lines? You know, that kind of stuff. But then at the same time, being in Hillsong, being like, oh, I actually feel, you know, this is a place I wouldn't be embarrassed to bring my friends to. Like, you know, at the time it, you know, the word was relevant, right? Like this is relevant. And this is a good merging of, you know, the rest of your week and your Sunday. Like it all just looks, there's not that huge divide anymore. Like who I am on Sunday and what I wear to church, you know, it's not this completely separate wardrobe. It's just like, oh, this is all very, very casual. And part of that, you know, feeling like, oh, it all incorporates so much better. I mean, and part of that was because, you know, I was at the college and they were just monopolizing your time in your life.
You are there all week anyway. So Sunday feels like the rest of the week. And it's like, yeah, it's because I'm basically in a service every day.
Every day, yeah. And the people that I know, yeah, we're all from, you know, all over the world and whatever. But like, you're coming here because you have similar views anyway. You're kind of looking for the same thing. And you're all just living in this bubble together. And so it feels like you're building this new, you know, cooler community. But it's like, no, you just found a different bubble. And you're just being heavily indoctrinated, you know, by it. So, you know, did I have a good time? Yeah, absolutely. And made, you know, some great friends. It's Sydney. It was good for me just to not be in the US. Like I think everybody, American, you should leave at some point, go somewhere else. Like it just expands your worldview in the sense that it gives you one because you don't have one, you know, living here. But to be like, oh, other people do things differently, you know, we're not the center of the universe. When did this happen? So I had a great time. Definitely. Did I learn a lot? No, like Hillsong is not.
It's not the most academic of schools.
It is really not. Like even then,
but it doesn't pretend to be overly either, right?
I don't know. Because I mean, I felt bad for the people who came like straight out of high school and who I'm like, oh, if they're going to think this is a true college experience, like if this is your first, and you think writing these little assessments or whatever, like, oh, like this is doing a disservice.
Right. Yeah. I
And
remember
even
thinking
like,
that when I was at Bethel, like we had to read like one book a month, and they were like, those like, the Christian books are like 150 pages. It's like big for the blind font, it's this huge font. Like and it says the same thing, like every chapter like is basically the same thing, but slightly different. And then you had to write like 2 paragraphs on it or something. And I'm like,
right.
dudes, and people are like, God, I don't know how I'm going to get my homework done this month. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what do you actually do with your time? Like, this is insane. This would take anyone about a day's work,
Right.
and you've got a month. Like, it's just so funny. Like, it was such a different experience to university or working, right? If you've worked full time, you're like, oh yeah, this full-time schedule of basically going to church like 20 hours a week or something. I can do that. That's not that hard. I could probably run a full-time job alongside of that, really, if I'm honest.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so like, and I have to, I mean, I still call it Hillsong Bible College, but I'm like, technically, like they don't even claim that. Like it is Hillsong International Leadership College. I'm like, Bible is nowhere in there. Like it's all about leadership. So yeah, so I'm like, I learned nothing. And I was in the, worship and creative arts track. And I remember, at the graduations, they would, have these wonderful like orchestral numbers, and you got this beautiful violin solo or whatever. And I'm like, the people who are coming here and they're thinking, oh, they learned that here. And I'm like, nobody learned anything musical here. Like I think maybe my 3rd year, like they were just starting like some basic theory classes, like music theory kind of thing. So I'm like, Hillsong International Leadership College teaches you to do Hillsong, and it teaches you Hillsong theology, Hillsong thought, just Hillsong.
Sure.
And so do
you feel you became a better leader because of that? Whatever leader means, but do you feel you got some leadership skills, personal, relational skills, things like that?
Yes and no. I think just because yes, because you're put in these positions and you're given opportunities. But no, because the kind of leader I became was really up to me. So which is why you have so many people who come out of Hillsong as leaders, but who are terrible leaders. So you learn that there. You learn a lot about how to treat people. You see how people are treated. You see how people, are elevated and how they're allowed to treat people. So it teaches a Hillsong style of leadership.
Right.
But it's more, Hillsong, one of their favorite sayings, culture can't be taught, it has to be caught. And so you catch on to a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And you're learning just in the sense that you're living. Like, I don't think going to Hillsong taught me any more about leadership than I would have learned, just having a job and being a manager. So Hillsong relies a lot on people just being who they are and doing what they would do anyway. And when it goes well, they take credit for it. And when it doesn't, they deny all responsibility.
Yeah. There was the saying at Bethel was they went, they weren't sent. So everyone at the end of at the end of like your year, you would graduate, and there would be there's a literal commissioning service at Bethel. They literally, Bill Johnson and Chris Valentin, the 2 leaders, they have a freaking broadsword, and you kneel down, and they literally knight you, like commission you, and they're like, you are like a revivalist. You can go and save the world now. And so, like, as far as sent goes, they send everyone, right? I mean, they literally knighted you with a broadsword. It's not like any options for you to say, no, they didn't approve of me. Like if they'd said, all right, I hope you had a great year, we'll catch you later, maybe they could say that. But they literally, like, you're kneeling down on his broadswords, you're approved, right? But then what's interesting is when people would go home, they would then be like, oh my God, I'm the next Bill Johnson. I can heal the sick and I can cause a revival. And then like just chaos breaks out because no one gets healed, or they say something really offensive or something that's slightly different theologically, and it all blows up. It comes back to Bethel, and Bethel would be like, oh, they weren't sent. They went. And it was this kind of like dismissive kind of thing of like, oh, they didn't learn from us. They were disobedient somehow. They didn't really get it. They didn't really catch that culture that can only be caught here, but you can also be here and not catch it, apparently. There's this kind of weird dynamic where we're just going to suddenly disapprove of you, even though we won't approve of you. Like it was weird, but like I totally get that, and it is a problem for these kind of institutions, right? They're kind of promising, you come to us and you'll become this amazing leader. You can go and run a worship as a worship pastor, or you can go and start a church, or you can go and start a business and be kingdom minded or whatever. But the truth is, a bunch of people are going to do that, and it's going to hit a brick wall hard. And we got to have some sort of line here where when it comes back to us and they're like, hey, you told this guy he could like run a worship service and it did not go well. He is not good. Like, whatever reason. Like, you've got to have some sort of party line here. We've got to have something we can say that's like, no, they fill in the blank, right? It's got to be something. Because there's a lot of, it was a while back that 2000. So you were in like mid to late 2000s. It's quite a while ago in Hillsong's time. But even then, they were churning out a bunch of people from their leadership course, right? I mean, how many people were in the years?
I can't even remember how many people were there when I was there. Like the college was growing. So I'm so bad with numbers. I don't know how many people were there then. I don't know how many people there now. I don't know. But a lot of, I saw, so Carl had been a few years before me, probably tops 4. So he wasn't that, far ahead of me. So the first time I ever saw him was at a youth conference in Sydney. Like he, came as a speaker. So Carl, he's not that far ahead of me. People who were leaders, who ended up being some leaders at Hillsong NYC, there were people I met there. Josh Kimes, the Hillsong Boston pastor now, and, who I was, writing his sermons for a while there. He and I were in like one of the same morning leadership groups. So we were, in the same class. So a lot of the people who are self-destructing right now, Jess and Reed Bogart and Dallas and all of that, they were, like 2 years ahead of me. So, I knew a lot of these people, like a lot of these names. I'm like, oh, we were either there at the same time or they were, just before me. And no, these are the superstars. These were, the head students and these are the people, and now we're seeing this fallout.
Right.
And so we're seeing it in a major way now because of what happened with Carl. And I think that just broke the dam for whatever reason. But it's been happening the whole time. Yeah. Even when I was there, they would give those stats about, the people who, study theology and the huge, I can't even remember what the number is, but it's an insane number who, 10 years down the road, don't even believe in God, like don't even go to church. And like at the time, you're like, oh my God, how that could never be me. And now I'm like, oh, I get it. Oh. Yeah. And that's a consistent, thing. I'm not on Facebook, so I was never in the group, but there was a huge, Hillsong College alumni fiasco where someone posted the question like, hey, has anyone else really struggled since leaving Hillsong College? And that just blew up and they had to go in and shut it down eventually. But it's like, we're seeing it right now, like this particular crop. I'm like, but it's been happening the whole time. And the people who are there now and still believing and still, no, they were all bad batches. They all went. None of them were sent. I'm like, give it a few years.
It's so complex, right? Because it's easy when it's like, oh, day 4 they leave, they go start a church and it blows up, and you're like, oh yeah, they're wrong. And then these guys, they start a church and went great, they're good. But then it is, and a decade later, oh shit. Well, they were good, but they're actually, how do we categorize these guys, right? Because we want to kind of start distancing ourselves, but at the same time, we have definitely not distanced ourselves from this person. We have done nothing but sing their praises for decades because they're doing it right according to like all our metrics, which of growth and success and, you know, being friends with cool people and celebrities or whatever else, you know. But it is funny, like you said, you know, I remember I guess I'm not that connected to Hillsong at all, really, but I've talked with people coming out of Hillsong and deconstructing for probably 10 years now. And so I remember it blowing up like in the alumni group. I'm not on Facebook either. And if I was, I wouldn't be in the Hillsong alumni group, believe it or not, as someone that isn't. But I remember people sending me screenshots and going, can you believe this? And I'm like, dude, yeah, we've been talking for 2 years about this, about how you're deconstructing and how like you've experienced abuse or, you know, things that were problematic. And I've told you that I've talked to dozens of other people from Hillsong that have done, yeah, I can believe it. Like, what are you surprised that your experience is not is not just one isolated experience? But I think that's the power of those moments in groups, and the power of what we're in right now in the internet is it's amazing how even when people tell us you're not the only person going through this, even when we know that there's something about these types of movements that kind of do enforce this narrative that like, no, if you feel like this, you are completely alone. Everyone else is loving this. Everyone else is great. If you feel like you were abused, it's probably something you misunderstood because those people are perfect and they're great and we're going to believe them, not you. Everyone else believes them and no one else has ever had that problem with them. So you clearly misinterpreted this, or it's a really hard thing to navigate. So talk to me. So you leave Hillsong, you come to New York, and then not long after that, you know, Hillsong New York kind of starts. You get immediately involved. I mean, it's perfect, right? You've come at Hillsong and you're like, I kind of wish there was something like Hillsong in New York, right? I can't be in Sydney. I'm in New York. Oh, I got to find a church, got to find something that kind of clicks, but nothing quite clicks maybe. And they're like, oh, we're starting a church in your town. You must have been like, this is the best thing that ever happened, right? So
like this is a literal answer to prayer.
Right, there you go. You're probably praying for this one. And so it's amazing, right? So obviously that isn't the case long term. Like before long, you start to kind of unravel some of your beliefs, some of what you think about Hillsong and that whole thing. Like, what did that look like for you? Like from the beginning of getting involved in Hillsong, you know, New York, what was happening internally with your faith, with kind of your worldview that worked, but then didn't?
I mean, and it was, you know, it took a long time because I was there from 2010 to 2017.
Sure.
So, you know,
and you said you've been deconstructing for about 3 years or so, right? So that's a lot of years of feeling relatively good. Maybe not so black and white, but.
I mean, 3 years since I've, not been in church. I mean, looking back
so more
now,
kind
I'm
of
like
de-churched, but
the process was definitely, you know, happening. I would probably say since 2013. And I thought it was later than that, but I was talking with someone the other day. So I was like, let me actually go look and see when I started having these conversations with Carl about, you know, can we get some more women and people of color, you know, on the platform. And I thought it had started later, but it had started in 2013. That was the first time I asked him about it. So in 2010, you know, they announced Hillsong. So the rest of 2010, we were just kind of, you know, meeting in connect groups. We had like the big launch service in October, but that was like a one-time thing. And then it was like kind of monthly. So 2010 was like pretty chill. Like we were just hanging out, like building our little friendships kind of on the ground. And, you know, from day one, like sometimes it feels surreal to like look back on it and be like, I think I must be making this up. Like it could not have been like this extreme. But then I'll talk to my friends. I'm like, no, it was that extreme. Because like I said, I was part of this little connect group before it was Hillsong. So it was, you know, Jess and Reed, they were planting a church, and a friend of mine and me, we had joined, and we were like, oh, because it won't be Hillsong, but it'll be Hillsong-ish. So that'll be good. It will be on the ground floor of this thing or whatever. So like Jess and Reed, when it was their church, were like so friendly, just, you know, reaching out because, you know, they had to be nice because they're trying to get people to come on. You
can't plant a church as an asshole. I mean, right? Like you can run a church a megachurch is an asshole, no problem, once it's kind of going. But you cannot start from the ground up as like, you know, being a bit dickish. You've got to be a really great, nice people person, listen, care, like
all of that. Right. So they were doing all of that. And I kid you not, the second it became Hillsong, all of that changed like immediately. Like we are your leaders. And like, here's what you have to do. Like, no more phone calls, no more texts, seeing how you're doing, not reaching out. Like it was so literally like overnight. It's like, oh, this is Hillsong now. We are somebody. And you know, they were right. People are going to want to be a part of this. So we don't have to be nice. Like, and it almost became a thing of, you know, almost pushing people, like testing people, like, do you really want to be a part of this? Like, because, you know, Hillsong just comes attached with so much, like, you know, it's going to be big. Like, we didn't know it was going to be as big as it turned out to be. But I mean, you know, people are going to want to be a part of this. And it's the first one in the US. Like, this is like a high.
It's huge.
This is an honor. Honestly.
What size was it at this point? Like when Hillsong kind of like identified that this church was going on, and they were like, this is going to be the church that we kind of like evolve into Hillsong New York. What kind of place were you at? You know, were you 75 Riverside kind of size, or, you know, UK megachurch?
We were, UK megachurch of like, 12, 13. So when it was Justin Reed's thing, it was maybe 15 people.
Okay. So really still getting off the ground then. It was still like really,
baby.
Really
yeah. Super, super small. And so, I mean, and that would be our full connect group. That was everybody. Yeah. So then once it became Hillsong, maybe like that next week, we had like 25 people. And then that kind of became like our core. But then they started having kind of like these welcome party kind of things. So then it'd be, you know, like 20 of us kind of hosting and doing things, but then that apartment would be packed. So, I mean, it would be 50, 60, 70 people coming. And then, you know, within maybe 2 months, then we were meeting twice a week. So in 2 different apartments, you know, and so it was, as soon as Hillsong, the name Hillsong was attached. And at that time, like everything was still new. Twitter, I don't think Instagram hadn't even really started yet.
Yeah.
So Hillsong didn't have a website. We just had like this raggedy little blog, and you kind of like, nobody was never really clear where it was or when it was. So I'm sure we would have had way more people, but like people had to work to like find this information. But even with that, like people were coming, people were finding it. And even, you know, when we had that launch service in October, they, you know, had people reserve, you know, RSVP, let us know that you're coming, you know, so we ended up having to have 2 services, you know, so from the beginning, it was just always high interest. Yeah. And so, you know, people were just coming. And so now to look back on it, I'm like, oh, like we knew these numbers were there and people were coming, but we were still, you know, we had our little core group. And so we were still doing a really good job of, you know, just brunching on Sundays, and just doing community.
Sure. So key.
Yeah. And so once, you know, weekly services and stuff started, you know, we used to talk about like, oh, I miss just hanging out. Because we went from seeing each other all the time to kind of working side by side, but not seeing each other at all. Yeah, once the services started, like it was just insane. Like that was the thing with Hillsong, you know, the lines around the block, you know, from day one, and just constantly adding services. So at the time, like we were just really, you're just going off of this adrenaline, and you're just so hyped, like people are coming, and it's this fun thing, and people want to be a part of it, and we're a part of building this. So as it was growing, because there were issues right from the beginning. I mean, just from the way people were being treated, the way, you know, the guest seating thing was instituted pretty early and was out of control pretty early on. So it was like all these issues, all the signs were there, but we kept telling ourselves, we're like, oh, like it just grew too fast. And so as soon as we can get a handle on this, well, then we can start dealing with some of this other stuff. But we never got a handle on it. And then a lot of that other stuff just kind of started, fading into the background. Like now it's just part of the culture and you don't even see it anymore. By the time I left, with guest seating, I'm like, oh, I'm one of the people on this list. Like I never stand in line. I don't, this is not something I have to worry about, and when I got to the point where I was like, oh, I have to have a conversation with myself because this is part of what's holding me here, honestly, like just my ego, like people know me here and I have a seat and I don't have to stand in line. And, I've put in time here and I've been doing things. And do I really want to go somewhere else and be nobody, like to not, start over from scratch? And so, a lot of my time at Hillsong was kind of deconstructing through looking at other people and being like, okay, they're a monster. I'm not that bad, but I can see like these monstrous tendencies in me.
Sure. Yeah.
And then also having to kind of balance, trying to be very self-aware and self-reflective and be like, okay, I don't like that. I feel like I shouldn't have to stand in line. Like, and I don't want to. And honestly, I won't. And so I am coming through the back door and doing these things. Okay, that's not my favorite part of me. But is that the same kind of issue as me thinking more women should be on platform? Is this also an ego kind of thing? So then having to, go do my research and, figure out what do I think about that? Women are always more than 50% of every church,
absolutely
doing all this work. But, and Hillsong claims to be this place that, we champion women. We love women. Like we're not, definitely not against women speakers and that kind of thing. But, 52 weeks in a year, maybe a woman speaks, maybe I'll overestimate, I'll go wild, say 4 times. Like, definitely Mother's Day. When the color conference is in town, you're gonna get some women speakers. And then just 2 random other times. Priscilla Shira will come
definitely
through.
Not Christmas or Easter or any big ones though, right?
No. And then Christine Kane will come through and say something. So it's like you've got, but that's it. So I'm like, is it wild of me to think I don't see why we couldn't just be 50-50, like that I think would be the most fair, especially because this is a place where, Carl Lentz is the headliner, but Carl's not actually here that often. So it's not like women aren't speaking because Carl is a pastor and he's up here every week. That's not what's happening here. Like we have this steady rotation of lots of other people. So is it crazy for me to want to see more women? Is it crazy for me to want to see more people of color? Is that the same kind of crazy as me not wanting to stand in line? So, I'm having to do my work. All right, which parts of these are just me wanting too much, overstepping my bounds, and what about this is legitimate? And having to be like, okay, what do I think God thinks about women? What do I think God thinks about, people of color? And like, Chris Valentine, his book, Fashion to Reign, actually, helped me a lot. I was like, oh, this is okay. All right. Yeah. This is giving me something to go from, to hold on to. So yeah, eventually, I had put kind of a joke on Twitter, I think maybe a week or 2 ago, but I was like, oh, if you're a Black woman and you stop straightening your hair anytime between like 2011 to 2014, like you're evangelical now. And it's, looking back now and kind of seeing these things that at the time completely separate to my, faith, to anything to do with God. But I'm like, oh, like, no, I'm like, no, I'm not going to straighten my hair anymore. And I'm going to do, this big chop. So it's like anything that was about me just becoming more authentically myself. Yeah. Now I look back, I'm like, oh, that was part of the deconstruction. Like just, casting off these traditions or other people's thoughts or what other people wanted, to see in me. So it was a super, super gradual process.
Yeah.
And at the time, I had no idea what it was leading to. If I had known.
Sure, if you did, you wouldn't have done it, right?
Right.
I mean, no one's like, this might result in me, like, you know, becoming an atheist, burning in hell forever, you know, whatever. Yeah,
Right.
let's fuck it, let's do it. No, everyone would be like,
No.
I'm out. Okay, no questions today. Let's get the straighteners out. Like, done, right?
Right. Yeah. So like I had no idea, which is so funny, you know, because then you get on this side of it and people are like, oh, well, then you were never saved. You were never serious about it. You just want to sin, like all these things. And I'm like, you know what? There's somebody for everything. So I'm sure there is somebody
that
out
person
there.
might exist.
They might exist.
Right.
I
casually went to Hillsong Leadership College because I wasn't that fussed about Christianity. You're right. That was the option for me.
Right.
Like what?
Yeah. I put put my entire life into this thing, you know, as a joke, like just to have a laugh. I just wanted to, just to fool you guys. So yes, it's like, oh, at the time I had no idea what was happening, but looking back now, I'm like, oh, yeah, you were always going to end up here. Like this, it couldn't have gone any other way.
Yeah.
And I think because, you know, especially when you're raised in it and you do take it seriously. And I'm like, and I was trying to figure this out from a biblical standpoint. You know, I was doing the work. Am I wrong on this? Why is this bothering me so much?
Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, too many questions, and wanting to legitimately know. And then, you know, here I am. And I'm like, no, I think if the God you have taught me to believe in is a God worth believing in, then I think these things would matter. And they matter to me. I think they matter to God, and they don't matter to you guys. So then I can't be here anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so that, you know, that was ultimately what took me out of Hillsong, just the issue really of equality. Like I'm, as a woman of color, I'm writing all the connect group studies you guys are using on a weekly basis. Mm-hmm. I'm writing the sermons for one of these pastors, but you guys literally see nothing more for me than just like staying in the background. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's fine for someone else. It's not fine for me, and it shouldn't be fine for you. Like if I were a white man, I'd be in a completely different sphere here. So I think I just need to be in a completely different sphere altogether. So that was the end of that.
Wow. It's, I mean, you're describing what is true for so many people. You know, there is a slow and slippery slope, you know, and it isn't intentional that there's any goal of like, right, I need to figure out how I'm going to slowly get out of this situation 5 years from now. No, it is, I want to be the best Christian I can be. I want to be more involved in this place. I want to see more people equipped to serve God, or, you know, all this kind of like, we're wanting this amazing thing that kind of is because we believe what you're teaching to too strong a degree, right? It's like, you said that Jesus loved everyone. So I'm thinking if Jesus loved everyone, maybe some black people might grab a mic occasionally. Maybe, you know, or maybe women wouldn't be treated as property effectively, give or take, right? Maybe they wouldn't just be the speechwriters behind the background, you know, like, or whatever.
Like, or the smoking hot wives. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, the smoking hot wives. Like, right. It's like, we love women and we are all about women. They all have to be attached to a man. Just to be clear, though, right? Yeah. It's like no single woman, certainly not beyond a certain age. At that point, you're like, oh, you are broken. Like these things are so problematic, but it's because of kind of some of the tenets of Christianity. Maybe not all of what Christianity presents itself to be, but certainly some of the core components of why we were Christian. You chase that and you pursue that. That's what starts pushing you out. And it's this thing of, you know, you recognize, I want to start celebrating who I am more. I want more autonomy. I want to, you know, go through that experience and see, I'm going to stop straightening my hair. I'm going to be more authentic as a black woman. I'm going to allow myself to be me. And yet there's a double-pronged component to that of, as I'm continuing to recognize me as an individual, I'm going to work less and less in a very rigid environment. But there's also the component of this rigid environment is going to want less and less to do with people that are very individualistic, right? There's this double-sided problem of it, right? So it's not just that this change to my hairdo is representation of change internally, where I'm learning to discover myself and chase my passions and pursuits. And I'm starting to go, hey, I'd like a mic occasionally. And actually, I'd like to see more people that look like me, or whatever. But it's also, it's a problem for those that are in power going, we don't want that on some level. We do want, if you're going to be black, at least kind of look white. Right? At least have the hair, at least, you know, or maybe be passing. I mean, there's all these different components, right? And it's problematic and it's hard to talk about for different people. I get this is not easy for a lot of people, but it's there. It's here. And it is pushing me as I discover myself more. It's pushing me out, because me as an individual doesn't work in a very rigid kind of conformist kind of environment, which is really what most conventional movements are. They need conformity. They want a celebrity, like the big hot shot at the top that everyone's looking at going, oh my God, teach me your ways and we'll do anything for you. But outside of that, we don't want any more of those people. Just one or two would be good. Yeah. You know, it's so interesting. But I think it's so key what you're saying there, of like, this is a slow, gradual change. It isn't something that, you know, this is because you were passionate about this. You were all about Hillsong. You loved Hillsong. You wanted Hillsong to be the best thing it could be. I'm intrigued, you know, Hillsong Sydney is such an international kind of community, and it's similar at Bethel, so international. I remember when I was there was about 2,000, by the end of it, I think the church was about 2,000 people, or was it? It was about 1,500 people, and the school was about 2,000 people, right? And then of the school, I think like 500 people were international. So you're talking like this huge bubble of people that are from all over the world. And it always struck me when I was there, I think by the last year, there were maybe like 5 or 6 people that were black, maybe a couple people beyond that were a person of color or something like that. But generally speaking, I was like kind of shocked, having come from the UK, where I had experience. I mean, I was from Scotland, which is a white ass place. Like, I think we have 5% non-white in Scotland, and we're very progressive. We actually we want immigration, we want change, but even still, we are like white. And even I from Scotland was like, damn, this place is white. It's so white. My roommate the first year was a black guy. He was the only black guy in our entire year. And there was one other black woman. And it was 750 people in that year. And I just remember that striking me. And I can't imagine how it would struck someone like my roommate. You know, I wasn't in the place where I could even overly conceptualize these thoughts, and I certainly could have articulated it to him to kind of like have a conversation about this. I was probably way too lost in my own systemic racism, and probably explicit racism as well at that time. But I wonder, you know, you talk about on the stage, Hillsong New York, there just isn't that representation. But certainly looking from afar, and I'm not that into Hillsong Sydney, but as a really international community as well, it still seems very, very white. Always has seemed very white. Like, what's going on there? What's the deal? Like, talk to me about that as someone that is black, going to Hillsong, Sydney, being around so much diversity as far as where people originate from, and yet maybe less so experiencing diversity in skin color, pigmentation around you. Going, was it very white, the school itself? Or is it just maybe the leadership that I'm seeing that I'm like, wow, this is really white? No,
I mean, it's very, Australia's is very white. And I can't even remember. I mean, it's something crazy. Like until 1980, maybe, where like the Africans and like Black people specifically were not even, you weren't even allowed to like visit Australia. So like you definitely could not, you know, migrate there. And so I mean, there's 2 sides to this conversation, because on one, there were not a lot of, definitely not Black Americans. And then this is where you kind of, you know, as an American, even as a Black American, like step out and be like, oh, okay, like even the term African American, like, you know, people kind of just apply that across the board. And I'm like, no, that's a very specific subset of people. You know,
it stops working when you're talking about an Aborigine in like, or, you know, a native person.
There are, you know, Black
African American. They're not either of those, maybe.
oh, you're from London. You're not an African American. Like you're Black. Oh, okay. So they're, just the diaspora. You're like, oh, hang on. There are different ones of us. So there are very few Black Americans. You had a few Black Britons, and then you had a few Africans. So there was, there was a girl who she DM'd me on Instagram. She's like, oh, I don't know if you remember me. Like we were at college at the same time. And I was like, I don't know, like if we ever met, but like I definitely know who you are. Like we just had a very clear sense of the others. So there weren't many of us. But then also, if we're coming to Hillsong, we are probably from a very specific kind of subset of culture anyway. And then like as a Black American, like I grew up in the suburb, Riverside. Like, so I think Black people in general, we're used to being one of the few. We're much better at being, the outsider in the culture. Like I'd be much more comfortable and just more used to like me, in a group of 20 white people. I'm like, okay, that's pretty usual. Like then probably you would be in a group of 20 Black people. Like we're just very used to moving in cultures that are not our own and kind of like being one of the only, which can also play on, our sense of exceptionalism. So yeah, I'm Black and there aren't many Black people here. And that's kind of special because I'm different. Like I'm Black, but I'm not like Black. And so, there are work I had to do, even just realizing, when I talk a lot about just white supremacy, and when I'm kind of coming at people, I'm like, I'm not coming at you from the perspective of, oh, I think you think this because I think I know you. No, I know you think this because I think it too. Like, it's not, I have white supremacist thoughts. I'm Black and I, would think certain things about Black people or be wary of whatever. And then I have to be like, hang on, why do I think that? And then just kind of realizing that it's just the culture that we're steeped in. So, initially being in Australia and being one of the only, like, it was like a special thing. And it's like, yeah, like we're the exceptions. We're different. But then at the same time, kind of getting, offended because, like I said, they didn't have Black people, until very recently. So then when people would ask me, oh, like, where are you from? And I'm from, California, the United States. No, before that, they did not have like a conception of like multi-generational Black people being in the United States. Like, that's when you find out, oh, the default for American is white. And the rest of us have to explain, no, where are you really from? Like, where? And I'm like, that's all I know. Like, I don't, you want to go back 6, 10 generations? Like, I don't know. Like,
right.
No, I'm American. Like, I'm just American. And so then having to be like, oh, we kind of don't belong anywhere. To Australians in general, like they have no concept of, like I said, multi-generational, our stake in this country. And then also, being in their spaces, I'm like, they just don't see it for us. And a lot of Christianity, life has changed and the world has changed so much, I'd say, in the past 10 years, as far as like race and kind of awareness and all of that. Especially back then, I'm like, oh, if you think about it, a lot of them have only really ever seen people of color in a missional kind of view. Oh, we're going to Africa and we're, helping these people. Or if we do know of Black people, we're seeing them on TV and they're in gangs and they've got, these drug problems and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think they're looking at you as kind of like, oh, like, bless their heart, they're trying to get out of that, scrappy underworld. But also, and, I don't know that they would even kind of know that this is what they were thinking, but they're probably all like, they probably got a few generations before they can like get to the place where we are as far as speaking and, doing things. Like we're still teaching them, it's just kind of that view of almost like they're still savages, in a sense. When I was growing up and going to his little private school, and we had, it was kind of like this homeschool curriculum, because the school I went to was just crazy, and it was like this kind of self-directed whatever. But I remember, like, in one of the books, it was like the social studies, but like kind of talking about how, oh yeah, like slavery was bad, but the Africans that were brought over got to know Jesus, so you win some, you lose some. So I think it's that kind of sense of just seeing people of color as, like, we're helping them, so we're still teaching them, they're still learning. So it's great that they're here, it's cute, but they're not, it's almost like they're pets. They're our pets, sort of. So you could be super, super, super extraordinary, and maybe make it, but for the most part, like, you guys are still, you're still behind. And we're still trying to, kind of bring you along. And then, like I said, on our end, a lot of us had a lot of work to do, a lot of unlearning to do, just about, our place in society. And the fact, I'm not exceptional. I am extremely average. Like, Black people are, if I'm fascinating, if I'm artistic, I'm average. We're all like this. Like, Black people, we're hilarious. We're just fun and just innovative and just full of ideas and artistry and all of these things. Yeah, I am extremely average, and kind of realizing that and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I have bought into a lot of this. And if I've bought into it as a Black person, I understand why we are where we are in so many ways. And so now, my current feuds at the moment, and I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about it kind of on a day-to-day basis. But I'm going hard against, like, Sam Collier from Hillsong Atlanta, and then, Krishan Jayratnam, who they're about to send here to take over Hillsong New York. And I'm like, oh, and there's these two men of color, and I'm this woman of color, just mocking them almost on a daily basis. Not quite, but
I've seen some of your Instagram stories. So yeah. And do you know what? I am left with a gnaw in me of, here's someone that is a Black person pointing out a Black person that has been co-opted by white supremacy, has become a vehicle and a mechanism for that. And I'm so intrigued by that dynamic, because I know as a white person, it's not my place to even talk about that. That's just not my place. And so I'm very thankful that there are people out there that are giving voice to that can speak to that. But it creates a lot of conflict to me, just watching that dynamic go down. I have to thank you, because you're teaching me and you're exposing stuff in me where I'm like, oh, she totally called out that Black person for not being a good enough Black person, or, and I'm like, gosh, what is my narrative of what a Black person should be, or what they should say, or what they should believe in? Who am I to somehow judge a Black person for being completely swallowed up in white supremacy? Like what you're talking about there, and you're talking about this thing of like, okay, so we're seeing, and of course this is subconscious, and if people are watching this or listening to this and thinking, well, I don't think of Black people like savages. Of course, most people, 99% of people aren't thinking explicitly in their conscious mind that, but subconsciously there's a component there. If we're thinking of a Black person as lesser than, and therefore the narrative is, if there is a Black person that works in this environment and is just as good as me on some level, well, they must be exceptional. It must be really hard to be that Black person and not start to go, fuck yeah, I'm exceptional, right? Who am I to judge someone that grows up in that environment, is constantly fed that way? It's so intriguing to me, because I can on some level step into the shoes of a Black person and go, God damn, that must be so frustrating. And as a white person, it's frustrating. But the issue on the table as a white person is not that a Black person has fallen into this dynamic. The issue for me as a white person is there is a dynamic here that is preying on even that Black person.
Right.
And that, right. And so I guess I said thank you, because like it's causing me to like take steps out of myself and look, and it's fascinating. But you know, do you think that is a very intentional thing on Hillsong's part? Are they reading the room? Are they going, oh gosh, you know, Black Lives Matter everywhere, all these different things, we better like try and be relevant, let's not throw in another hip, you know, guy with his big horn rimmed glasses and, you know, whatever, and like let's try and do something different, let's try and find a Black person, let's, you know, not going to find a gay person at Hillsong, are we? But you know, how can we be as relevant as possible without not crossing too many lines?
Right.
It's an interesting dynamic for sure.
Yeah. I mean, as far as Atlanta, I think they knew they would get pushback if you're trying to go to this historically Black area with a white pastor, but also realize they're only going there because it is gentrifying. So like the demographics, the dynamics are changing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there in the first place. And then, you know, as much as they talk about, you know, culture can't be taught, it has to be caught and whatever, there are plenty of Black people who have gone through Hillsong, who were part of Hillsong New York, who've been to Hillsong College, like all of these things. Sam Collier is not one of those people. So it's like you guys very specifically handpicked this man at this time for reasons. And you know, when he was first announced, and I've actually tried not to know too much about him. I'm like, I want to keep it very, very surfacey. So I'm not researching you. I don't want to know anything personally about you, because I don't want to like accidentally infuse anything that would be like malicious or, you know, be mean. So I'm like, I don't want to know too much about you. I just want to deal with you on a surface kind of level. So just surface level, you know, I'm like, oh, like I know who this guy is. So he is, you know, somebody traveling, working in this world. You are the exceptional Black. And at this point, you still buy into that and you like it. And so, you know, I know who you are, Sam. I've been you. I get it. But it's dangerous now because like time has changed so much. And like Hillsong is like currently on fire. So I don't even understand people who are like trying to sign up to this like right now. And I don't understand like how you justify why do you need a Hillsong in Atlanta? Like if you just want to plant a church in Atlanta, just do it. Like this is a problematic place. This is a problematic structure. We don't need to do this. But you know, it's good to you in some ways, so you're gonna go for it, and that's fine. But you are like, just be very clear what you are and what you are being used as. And so you are being used as this shell. So Hillsong can put up this shield and say, hey, look, we are diverse and we do, you know, have a Black pastor. And it's like, it's not about skin color at this point. Like it's about thought. Like, don't tell me you have a Black pastor. Do you have a decolonized pastor? Like, you know, and so with Sam, and I mean, he unfortunately makes it really easy because he's just really bad at making these statements and just speaking out about these. I'm like, this is terrible. Like, and I didn't have to work hard to like break this down. Like, this is just bad. And for the level of just the stage that you're on at this point, like it's infuriating, but also just kind of funny, like just kind of what a bad job Hillsong does at kind of covering who they are and covering what they're looking for. And then also just like, you know, it's not, Hillsong is dumb. Like it's just, and it takes dumb people and gives them great platforms. Like you don't have to know a lot about the Bible. You don't have to know a lot about anything really, except Hillsong theology and Hillsong, you know, kind of leadership. So like with Sam, I'm like, you're not, if Hillsong wanted, you know, a Black person who's going to be, you know, a thought leader, and really pushing any kind of change, there are lots of those people out there. And you did not choose, any of them. You chose this guy who has a few sound bites and can kind of sound like, maybe, is he progressive for Hillsong? Maybe. Is he progressive? No. So that's him. And then with like Krishan, Krishan I actually feel bad for, because I'm like, I don't think, Hillsong, you are being sent. Like, I don't think you, and I haven't even heard them try to spin the story as if he woke up one day with like New York on his heart. I'm like, no, Brian was looking around. I was like, who can I send? You're going to go. Because I'm like, what brown man in the year 2021 with 4, daughters wants to move to this nation? Like, you want to move here at this time when like Black people are being targeted, and you look Black. Right. You are definitely of Asian, East Asian descent. That's not going well. Women are not treated great here. You're going to bring your daughters here. I'm like, this is 100% not your choice. So I'm not, I think people want to make it about personalities, and why are you being mean to them? They're not doing anything. I'm like, it's really not personal. And I'm not saying anything to either one of them that I wouldn't be saying to a white man, like anybody else in their position. I'm like, you're Hillsong's human shield. So it's going to have to go through you first. But I'm like, no, I'm coming at the system. And you guys just happen to be the people standing in for the system right now.
It's so hard at that stage of the way that you frame life at that point in your life, of like, the system and me are so intricately woven. That's why deconstruction is such a fucking nightmare, right? Because when I deconstruct my faith, I deconstruct me. Me gets deconstructed. But in the same way, when I'm not deconstructed, when I'm fully in and I'm fully all about this, when someone comes at like racism, when someone comes at sexism, when someone comes at, systemic abuse, they are attacking me, it feels like. Because these are parts that have interwoven and become who I am. I wouldn't call them that, and I wouldn't say that they're abusive or whatever, but it feels like a personal attack. And I kind of get that component, but as someone that does the same thing, I'm constantly calling out systems and ideologies, and people go, why are you so mean to churches? Why are you so mean to people? Do you hate pastors? Do you hate these? And I'm like, I don't really hate anyone. I really hate some really destructive ideas and theologies and ideologies, and I'm trying to deal with that. And a lot of people are so interwoven in that they might take it very personally. But yeah, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, like I was saying to my wife, I say pretty much give or take every day, why the hell do we not live in California? Because I miss California every day, mostly for the weather, if I'm honest. There's very few other parts, if I'm honest, but I do miss the weather. I miss stability in weather. But, she's like, well, one day maybe we could move. And I'm like, we will never, ever go to America until it gets its shit together. And 70% of my audience is American, and they're nodding. Mostly, right? Like, I'm like, dude, there is no way. And I'm a white guy. I am like, I tick all the boxes on privilege. Like, if you could find privilege boxes, I tick them all. Maybe apart from wealth. I'm really not doing so great on that one. But give me time. I'll be a billionaire before I know it. But I tick all the privilege boxes. And I'm like, dude, there is no way I am going into that country for any extended periods of time. Just no, I want to have healthcare. I don't want to be terrified of cops, because even as a white guy, I'm still not sure I'm not going to get shot. Like, that's not an option on the table in the UK. You don't get shot by cops. It just doesn't really happen.
That's wild. Can't even imagine.
I know, it's crazy. We can enforce things like someone speeding without guns. Sometimes
imagine,
figure it out. It happens, I mean, that's bad. Shouldn't speed. Don't do that. Don't drink drive. But we somehow just get that message across without 17 bullets to the face, or whatever, like the mechanism behind American traffic copping is. So you see something, and I hadn't even thought of it like that, but you mentioned, like, why would someone of color with 4 daughters of color go, let's move to America right now? I've been watching the news on and off, And all I'm seeing is positive ideas of why I should move to America. Like, I haven't seen any good reasons in the last year for why it would be a good idea to live in America at all. Like,
Right.
none.
Right.
Apart from
So
maybe the
it's
weather
like-
forecast, maybe, depending where you live.
But not New York. Yeah.
Not
you're
New York. No, I'm not moving to New York ever, Jenny. Never. I will never meet New York ever. I'll come in for a week at a time. Selectively at certain times of the year.
So yeah, so it's, I mean, and then, I mean, it gets tricky because there's so many conversations to be had within conversations. And then it gets, you know, to the place where I'm like, it's, I mean, on both ends, him coming here from Sydney, you know, Sam and Atlanta, all of it is just this colonization. So then like we have to deal with just the problematic structure of just mega churches anyway. It's like, who are you to just move into a community and think you can tell them, you know, what they need and what to do?
Yeah.
I'm like, if you are truly about Atlanta, you truly want to help Atlanta, Hillsong, just put that money somewhere else. Just give it to a church that's already there.
Yeah.
It's like, why do you have to come in and be here now? Like, you don't care about this place. You don't, because you didn't raise up anybody here, you know, to lead it. You just found somebody and you're like, okay, now we're going to find a building and we're just going to put you there and, you know, you're going to do that. You know, for Sean coming to New York, I'm like, you know, forget about, like I said, everything we've already mentioned just about America in general. You are going to come to like one of the harshest places and one of the most concentrated places in America. You're going to come here and you're going to tell me what I need or like what God wants to do for me. You don't even go here. Like, what are we doing? And just the insensitivity that shows, you know, you guys have already been through a lot because this is not a new church. We put somebody else there before. That was a disaster, you know, and now Hillsong's language around it is, you know, restore, rebuild. There's another R, but it's not repent, it's not repair, you know, it's not reparation. You're not doing anything. Like, you are literally sending someone who is from, you know, maybe the same like Hillsong College class as Carl Lentz. You know, you are sending him
with the same ideologies,
the same
theologies. Yeah. Redo, maybe.
A redo. 10 years later, like in this city, like you have learned nothing. Because he's coming here, he does not know this culture, he does not know these people, you know, not as an American, not as a New Yorker, which is a completely different thing. I mean, it can get as specific as, you know, which borough do you live in?
Right. I mean, New York, people can be very, this is who I am, where I'm from. What do you mean you're from Queens or whatever? Right? Get out of here. Like,
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's like, oh, hi, I'm from Sydney. Like, how are you? Fuck off. Like,
I've got what you guys need because you guys can't get it together. So we're going to come in from way over here and help you out. How is that not missional colonization?
Yeah, well, it is. You talk about what Atlanta's doing, like with a new mega church, just dumping it in. I mean, Atlanta, good God, do they need more churches? Really? Is there not enough churches in Atlanta? Fuck. But like, it's like Walmart, right? You come in and you go, right, oh, we love this community. Like, at least Walmart is honest. We're capitalists. We want to make a shit ton of money. We're going to shut down every company that is in this area for 20 miles by providing you with everything, undercutting everything. It's going to be brilliant. And you know what? Walmart's great. I can go there and get anything I want. I can get it cheap. Great. Done. In, out. I've got everything. And sorry, every person in this area that had a business, you're all shutting down and having nothing. That's basically what these mega churches do on some level. Like, they're not saving people. They're not getting people out of, you know, satanic cults, and they're not saving Muslims into Christianity or atheists coming back into their Christian tradition roots, or none of that's happening. What happens is people from other churches move and these churches shut down. And so if it was really about this area, if it was really about these people, you could genuinely just give a crap ton of money, because Hillsong's got it, to these local communities and go, gosh, what are some amazing churches in this area that are making a difference, but they don't have the resources of what do we got? Passion or some other huge church in Atlanta. You know, we could support some of these smaller churches, make a big difference. But ultimately, they are Walmart. They do have that same drive of like, oh, here's a city that's not been exploited with this brand. and we can shut down basically most other churches in this area as they all flee to our big mega church, and boom, we make a few more million a year. That's kind of, again, these are kind of maybe subconscious things. I don't know how much, I don't want to wish any evil on anyone. I don't want to presume evil. I think a lot of this is subconscious stuff. It gets into you as a system, but I think it's there. That's part of what this is. It's like, we need another plant, not so we can save Atlanta. Atlanta's got more Christians than most cities on earth. What we need a bigger church in that area with money funneling towards us and our movement. Really, that's what it's about.
That's what it is.
And we can't see it. You know, I genuinely think most people that are passionate about that are going to be involved with that plan, they're not going to see it as that. They are going to buy we're going to save people. We're going to change Atlanta. We're going to have a revival and save the city. And I don't know, we'll swing the city back to red, or I don't know, like, who knows what the goal is there, right?
What are you trying to do here? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. This is not the amazing movement of Stacey Abrams, right? This is a very different movement.
Yeah. So like from my, with Sam, I'm like, I look at him and I'm like, oh, like I feel bad for you, because I know what it is to now on this side. Like I still feel bad, and I still struggle with it, and probably doing penance in a lot of ways for just my own complicity. Like I was part of this system. And I have to deal with that. Like I was part of this thing that hurt people, and I was a proponent of it. And I helped build this. I was part of doing this. And now, and I mean, I was, pretty low level. I was not the pastor, and nobody ever said to me some of the things that I've said to Sam, be like, man, you are going to regret this. And I don't know. I mean, everyone has their own opinion. And, we play devil's advocate a lot, and we did that a lot, with Hillsong. Okay, I had a horrific experience, but that's my experience. And maybe other people did have a good time and whatever. And so now I'm like, well, no, do people have good experiences? Yes, because we find ways to, and we, like I said, I have some of my best friendships, and I had, good times, but it was like with the people in my circle. It wasn't coming from the leaders. It wasn't, we had a good time because we found ways to have good times and bad times. I'm like, that's just a human tendency. Like we can make the best of bad situations. But then Hillsong wants you to focus on the best and forget that it was a bad situation. Like this is a bad situation. Will people have good times at the services? Yes. Will people make friends? Yes. But could they have done those things without Hillsong? Yes. And does the ends justify the means? In this now, I'm like, no, because it doesn't have to happen. Like people don't have to keep being hurt for a few people to be helped. And especially when the few that are being helped are generally the people at the top. They are being helped significantly financially. You guys are having a great time, and everybody else is paying for it. And we don't have to do that anymore. And Sam, for you, and again, you don't know me. You can be like, she's, whoever. But I'm telling you this, and I know other people are telling you this, that this is going to hurt people. And that is going to eventually weigh heavy on you. Like you're going to have to grapple with the fact that this is just an abusive system. Yeah. And maybe you didn't know that going in, but it's like, I don't know how you can look at everything that's happening and not have some kind of pause and be like,
there's some big red flags right now that weren't maybe as evident earlier.
Right. Yeah. Like not even a year ago.
Ones. Right.
I mean, there were rumblings, but people were very, and people are still very mostly silent. As long as it takes to get out of Hillsong, it takes longer, to get Hillsong out of you. And, it's the same way with like deconstruction. None of us ever intended to, but also coming out of Hillsong, it's like we don't really come out guns blazing. Like most people just leave quietly. You're like, okay, that happened to me, but other people still seem to like it. Like I'll let it be. So most stories still haven't been told. So, the rumblings that are happening now, and like the fact that, that campus has been shut down and this pastor has been dismissed. And we've got a lot of other people who are just in this nebulous kind of state. They're suspended, but we don't know why. Just a lot of questions, a lot of red flags. And to see that, and then to see people, on Instagram and on Twitter to be being like, hey man, hey, maybe, I don't know, maybe. And to just, disregard that and be like, no, Brian Houston said whatever, and I'm going to go with that. Okay. Like, I can't stop you, but it's going to hurt, man.
It feels like, in my experience, and this might be just my experience, but it feels like people can't see until they see, generally speaking. I know for me, I just couldn't see. And then one day I was like, holy shit, what's happening here? That is not okay. And that even was maybe a gradual waking up with lots of smaller moments of like, oh, that's not right. And I didn't see that before. But I can go into the midst of somewhere like Hillsong. I could pick Hillsong, New York, go right in there, even in the midst of all they've been through, and sit down with someone and say, look, let me talk to you about how problematic some of this theology is, and let me try and help you find a different, not even outside of Christianity, let me just try and explore how you could maybe move into something that's maybe a slightly more healthy branch of Christianity. And literally one ear out the other. Like with 9 out of 10 of those people, maybe some people would be like, oh, I've been thinking about this in the last year. This is really helpful. Thank you. And I'm being really generous saying maybe 1 out of 10, because I don't think it would be that at all. And so, and let's be honest, if you're picking who's going to lead this, I guarantee they're not one of those 1 out of 10, right? I guarantee Sam's not getting a tweet from you going, oh, I have been thinking actually. No, he's going, oh no, that's just, whatever. Like, just, it doesn't hit. And it makes me wonder do you think something like Hillsong can be saved? Christian word. Can it be redeemed? Can it become something of, and different people have different views on religion as a whole, but I do think there are forms of religion, whilst I'm not particularly religious, I think there are forms of religion that even if they're not true or correct, they can be very helpful for people in where they're at, and they don't have to be destructive inherently. I think everything comes with a bit of destructive and a bit of good, that's just life. But I feel like there's a type of Christianity that people can engage with that helps them, it develops them, it helps them grow, it helps them find meaning in the world, helps them deal with pain and suffering and whatever else, that doesn't have to result in sex scandals and inequality and racism and sexism. That doesn't need to be here. Do you look at something as big as Hillsong and think that's possible? When you're sending these tweets, do you think maybe we can, if we all get together, if there's enough of a voice, if there's enough people wake up, can Hillsong change? Or do you think something as big as Hillsong is just, it's impossible, right? Can Walmart become the good guy? I mean, we're like, no, nothing about the Walmart empire is going to be a good thing ever.
Right. So with Hillsong, I'm like, no, I don't think it can be saved. Because I don't think it wants to be. It's not, I think we get to, and maybe that's just Christianity in general. Like, it's been so personal, everything, personal salvation, everything is so, it's about me. It's about my experience. It's about my relationship with God. And so then we think we have, it's really disempowering in a way, but then it also makes us think we have more power than we do. And we're always like putting that towards systems. So like, I don't know anybody, who is at Hillsong currently. I'm sure there are people, there's nobody that I know, like in my friend circle, people that I still talk to, nobody is saying, oh, Hillsong's fine. Hillsong's great. Like, it's great. And I don't know what you're talking about. People are like, stop making fun of it, because they're doing their best. And we're trying to change it. We're trying to change it. We're going to change it. And so there's this idea, and Hillsong continues because Hillsong is honestly full of really good people. Some of the best people that I know, but they're all at the bottom, and they're all like trying to change this behemoth. Like, you're trying to, it's like, shoveling the coal in the bottom of the ship and trying to turn it. Like, you don't even have that function.
Right.
You guys are going to keep feeding this beast. You're going to keep powering it, but it's going to keep going where it's going. like you can't do anything from the bowels of the ship. So there are wonderful people in the bowels of the ship.
Yeah.
But the people who are steering it, they don't want to go in a different direction. Yeah. And so, and you know, when you're down there, you can't really see where it's going. So if they're up there and they're telling you, we heard you guys, we're changing. Yeah. And we've adjusted course, and you're just taking their word for it.
Right. Like of course, because you would. These are good leaders. They're trustworthy. They're doing their best. They want the best for us. Like, of course, you're gonna assume they're telling you what they, and maybe even those leaders actually believe it themselves as well, right? They actually they can't see to what degree that change needs to happen. They can't get to the point of making reparations. They can't get to the point of those things. Right. But they do go, okay, we fucked up. Yeah, it's very hard for us to not acknowledge that. But we'll make that change by just moving that person to the side and replacing them with someone that looks similar. Oh, see, change is better. Better, everyone. Look at that. It's better. Just like
new model. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But, and they probably, I know it's silly almost. It's so farcical. But actually, I think when you're in that world and you are just lost in that system, I think you really do think, gosh, we did it. We nailed it. And yeah, it's so tough. Do you think, so here's a question for you that I always think about, right? What if Carl Lentz hadn't like gone and done a whole bunch of stupid shit? What if he deconstructed? You know, like my question is like, so you can't change it from the bottom. We know that. And no one from the bottom, like Brian Houston's not going, let's plant a church or let's have someone take over from Carl in New York. Oh, I know. Right. You down the bottom. Hey, Johnny, do you want to take over? Go on, you take over. It'd be great. You've got some new ideas. You've been asking some great questions over the years. We'd love to see them in charge, right? That's not going to happen. But what happens if Brian Houston deconstructs? What happens if, whoever, right? Do you think that systems are actually even bigger than their leaders at times? Because sometimes I wonder, even if Brian deconstructed, would the whole system rebel and he'd be out anyway, which is kind of a crazy thing to think of in a sense, right?
Well, I mean, it gets to the point, I don't know. I mean, because deconstruction, I feel like it's funny that the deconstruction space right now is so white as well.
It's so white.
And I don't think, like, it's not the whole space. I think it's just the people who are speaking. Yeah. And in some ways I'm like, well, it kind of has to be, because I mean, we're just seeing like the evolution of church, right? So,
sure.
The spaces we came out of were very white. So yes, of course, this would be very white. But I think, people of color, queer people, women, I feel like anybody who had something about them that already kind of put them at odds with the church, it's just that much easier. And it just kind of, it's a little more likely to happen. But I'm like, the more you are the standard, like I'm always very surprised, with white men who not just deconstruct, but decolonize, because that's a whole, other process. It's easy, a lot of white people can walk away and, whatever. But I have not seen very few, have I seen any really like wealthy white men?
Right.
Or, powerful, kind of at the top of their game, whatever. Like I think about Brian Houston now and I'm like, I don't know what he actually believes, because I don't know that you could actually believe in this God and kind of justice and the things that you're kind of counting on other people believing in, and have a system like this and behave the way that you do, because these things are happening and things are falling apart. And like, look at Brian's reactions. Like, he's not apologetic. He's not repenting.
It's
like
terrifying. Like it's really weird.
It's deny until you have to kind of admit something went wrong, but then never be clear about what went wrong. And, so I'm like, can Brian Houston deconstruct? I'm like, I don't think he can, because I don't even know that he really believes anything at this point.
Right.
As far as like Carl or even some of the other pastors in the Hillsong system, I feel like it's not impossible, but I think it would be very difficult, because I think the Hillsong system is kind of a trap for even the leaders. Because you look at Carl, you look at, Josh Kimes, a lot of these pastors, the only schooling they had was Hillsong College. And that's not to say anything about people who don't have degrees. Like, you don't have to have a degree, but like this is the only schooling you had. You went straight from that into working in churches. You got hired by Hillsong. Like, I don't know how much you're making, but I know you're making more than you probably should be, and more than you would be making at a regular job, and definitely more than you're making for like the level of work that you do. Because like, Josh Combs, you can afford to buy a house in New Jersey, and I'm writing your sermons for you. So you're not even doing your work, but you're getting paid a lot. So I feel like a lot of these guys get trapped in. Like, I don't know. You guys are probably, I would hope you are deconstructing in a sense, because I would hope you are serious about your faith and you are looking at things and you do have questions, but you probably can't afford to have questions, because what are you going to do? You're really going to leave this lifestyle and go get a job? You're going to get a job?
Do you think Starbucks is going to pay the same?
Right. Like it's like a bad marriage in some sort. You've got used to this level of life, this you're used to, the lifestyle to which you've become accustomed, and it would cost you so much more financially, job wise, your circle friends, like all these things that a lot of us, thankfully, finances were not really involved in this. Like, if anything, it saved me money, because now I don't have to tithe to you, anymore. This wasn't my job. Like, it was my whole life in some ways, but like so many key things weren't tied to it. But when you've got these people, and I mean, like, your job is tied to this. This is your financial security. These are the only people This is your entire job history. Like, you are really in this, like, this gilded cage, and you're going to leave that?
Yeah.
Like, I think
it's impossible.
It's built into the structure to kind of keep people here. So is it possible that they could be deconstructing? Sure. But it would take just such a strength of conviction and character to like act on that and to leave that. And unfortunately, character is not, a huge asset, in Hillsong leadership. Like, you're not. So it's possible.
It's not day one of Hillsong Leadership College seminar. Yeah. No, I talk to a lot of people on Instagram. That's what I do day in, day out. And a lot of them are pastors. And so, the data is there. Like you say, like if you go to seminary, if you're in leadership, the more involved you are, the more likely you're going to deconstruct. And so, of course, you'd start to think, bet pastors start deconstructing pretty quickly a lot of the time. And they do. Like, you talk to these pastors, but the thing is, they're like 20 years in, and they have mortgages, and their kids, and they've got college funds, and they've got retirements to fund, and they've got to pay the bills and feed themselves, and they've got themselves in situations. Their mortgage is not for like a 1-bed apartment in Iowa, it's for like, a big house in, somewhere like San Diego or something. And they're like, shit, that's hard to pay for, right? I need this bizarre, weird job where, even if they're very qualified, right? Some of them have been to Bible seminaries and, and things like that. Even then, that's not the most transferable skill, right?
Right.
You're not, generally speaking, going into work as a mid-level manager at any company and saying, hey, I went to Hillsong Leadership College. Even with that name, they're still being like, let's Google that quickly, right? They're not, you have an MBA. Right?
Don't Google it.
Yeah, exactly. No, just take my words. Leadership. 4 years. Kind of. That's like a degree, right? Definitely a degree. 4 years is a degree. And leadership. Yeah. No, what? Put your phone down. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, so you get so trapped. Like, I've seen so many outcomes, but generally speaking, the outcome I see is if they are courageous, and it is a big if, but I've seen them and I've talked to them and I know them and I've visited them. Some people, if their church is tight enough, if it's, like what you're talking about in the early days, is this small camaraderie, and there's not this, distancing and hierarchy kind of vibe to it. I've seen people turn their whole church around and lose some people, but actually keep some form of community and camaraderie and evolving faith together. I've seen that happen, and it's probably like 0.5%. Like, it's tiny. The rest of the people that are brave enough to start coming out very quickly find themselves out on their ass, like done,
Right.
just gone. And realistically, their options are really limited in work. And so what most people do is they just don't say anything. They either stick it out. I've talked to so many pastors that are like, I've only got like 12 more years till I can retire. I'm just going to do it. And I'm like, only 12 years. I'm like weeping for them. I'm like, I would want to kill myself. I mean, God, it's just so much to do, to carry that weight. Just in general, never mind them being the person that everyone's looking to. I'm coming up with a sermon every week when I don't believe it. Oh my gosh, that must be exhausting. And then the other type is the person that's going, I'm not going to say anything, but I am going to try and figure out, how do I start to slowly build up a business on the side? How do I start to figure out a graceful out? But you're right. Like, I don't think the system, it doesn't allow for people to transition out. It just doesn't.
No.
It's a huge problem for so many of us. I know we're running out of time. We were plowing through time. You called it. We were going to chat. But you mentioned something that's really interesting to me, and I talk about this often, but usually it's with random white people, because that's who my show is. It's like me talking to people that are deconstructing, or people that are experts in deconstruction. I love both those components. But 9 times out of 10, like, you know, I frequently have an appeal. You know, I've got tons of followers online, and I'm like, hey, who is a Black person, Indigenous person, person of color that's deconstructing their faith, that's like going through these kind of evolving phases? Can you recommend people for the podcast? And literally, even when I explicitly say, hi, looking for BIPOC, like literally that is my thing I'm looking for, I still, like 50% of the people that recommend are still white. And I'm like, Jesus. And when you don't suggest that, it's like 99.9%. And there is an incredible component, but I love talking to people that are a person of color about like deconstruction, their journey. But one thing that I found that's so interesting is almost everyone I have spoke to comes from a white church, white backgrounds, white evangelical kind of thing. It's not that they've deconstructed from a Black kind of historical mainline kind of church, generally speaking. I think there's parts of that. I've got my own guesses as to why that is. I think a lot of the Black church community had to deconstruct a lot of shit before anything even got off the ground, right? Given how the Black church came about and where it came from, and that whole component, there's a whole bunch of different stuff there where there's less to deconstruct, right? Liberation theology has a lot less to deconstruct than white American evangelicalism. I don't think anyone's debating that. But what do you think is going on with some of these dynamics of is deconstruction just largely a white movement for people within the white church? Is that what it is? Is that why we see such a disparity of because generally speaking, the church is not a white phenomenon. The Black representation, even Indigenous representation, is hugely Christian still in America. And so it's really surreal and quite interesting to me, this dynamic, you know, of how hard it is for me to find some people of color to have on my show. I'm a white guy, so it's already hard. I'm a white guy having a podcast. So I really need to like level the playing fields here. Having more white guys is not helpful for me, like trying to create some like diverse kind of opinions and perspectives. But yeah, what do you think's going on in the deconstruction space when it comes from a perspective of a person of color?
I think a couple of things. Number one, I think it's probably just the language. Because I'm trying to remember like when I even first like heard the term deconstruction. Like, I mean, It was something I was going through. And I just didn't have word for it. So I'm like, oh, this is just, I'm just leaving the church. Oh, and I just kind of don't believe what I used to believe anymore. So I think a lot of people, and then it was one of those things where you feel like you're so alone and you don't have the words for it. You don't have the language. Like I had thank God, like I had a really good friend of mine, you know, Daniel, who was going through the same thing at the same time. So we had each other, so we could talk and kind of bounce off of each other. But it felt like it was kind of just the two of us. And then it's like, I don't know, you find one podcast, you read one book, whatever, and suddenly like this whole new world opens up and you're like, oh, there's like this whole community and there are lots of people, you know, doing this. And so it was right there, but we didn't know until we somehow stumbled into it. So I think a lot of people just haven't stumbled into it. I also think, you know, in the Black community, and I think in communities of color, being agnostic, being atheist, these kind of things are just more shameful. You
Sure.
don't do that. So it's not something you super talk openly about anyway. So
Sure.
like your friends might know, but it's just not something you're kind of bold and out about.
Sure.
So yeah, and then so a lot of people just kind of let go of their beliefs quietly. So they're not really talking about it. And then it becomes, it's like not even a thing. You're just, I just
Sure.
believe or don't believe what I don't believe, but I'm not necessarily talking about it. It may have been years since I've been in church. So like some people kind of predated the movement. So it's like they're already, especially if you left like the Black church, then you might not have some of the same traumas and some of the things to kind of work through as
Sure.
somebody else. You just kind of almost like aged out of it, or you just, just stopped going to church and you didn't even really think about it. And now it just doesn't really apply to your life, so they're out there, but they're not really necessarily talking about it. The other thing is, I think white people are just automatically more comfortable, and we're more comfortable just automatically assuming like sort of an expert status of them.
Right.
So they just kind of step up and they're like, hey, I've got something to say. And meanwhile, even a lot of, the people of color, the Black people who are known kind of in the deconstructing space, because they've written a national book, or they've done something
Right.
kind of
Absolutely.
Extraordinary. Like they're not just me. Like
there's
this
still
is
that
average.
exceptionalism too,
Right.
For sure. Like
Right.
it's still a very, it's not decolonized, the deconstruction movement as a whole. I think there's a lot of people intentionally trying to do something about it, but I do wonder, how much this is a sort of self-perpetuating kind of dynamic. Is there any escape from it?
Right. So, because like, and I can think about people who I talked to a lot kind of in the background, and we're talking about deconstruction, even if we're not necessarily using that word, where we're just talking about concepts about God, and what we used to believe and what we believe now. So it's these conversations, but they're just my regular friends, just regular people. So like I can give you a list of like just regular Black folk I know
a list forever.
who I have amazing conversations with, but they're not even necessarily like trying to be in this deconstruction space. Like they're not, they'll come on your podcast and maybe give their Instagram account. I don't know. But like they're not.
Those are my favorite guests though, where it's just like, I am like just
they're not
a
posting
random
the memes
person.
And they're not,
I just have grown up. Let me tell you my story. I have no Instagram to share with you. In fact, please do not share my details with anyone. I don't want weirdos following me. But like, those are my favorite stories and conversations and generally what I love as well when I'm talking to the experts is I'm much more interested in their story. It's more interesting a lot of the time. So yeah, it's really intriguing. But you're right. Like, there's so many components to that for sure. I read a book. I can't remember who wrote it now, and it's really gonna grate me. But great book called Ebony Exodus, which is all about the mass movement away from Christianity within specifically the Black American culture. And one of her key points was what you mentioned, where there is so much of a tighter kind of correlation between community and church within the Black culture, and generally speaking, not as much within other people of color, but specifically Black. That's so much bigger than even, we can be pretty tight. The evangelicals, whatever, white Mormons can be tight, that's hard to come out of. But it's almost more like what maybe a Mormon would go through, where they go through such a harder time than most evangelicals, because the way they do community is tight. Like, it is really everything, food, hanging out, everyone knows everyone, everyone's constantly in relationship and talking to each other. And so to lose Christianity is to lose that. And evangelicals, on some level, if you've deconstructed, you can start to go, oh, I kind of get it. But I don't think we do, generally speaking. I've the honor of visiting different Black communities and churches, and just going, whoa, this is not my world. This is a totally different way of connecting and doing life than I am used to. And it's beautiful to behold, but I can't imagine what that's like, having to go, yeah, but I don't believe what these people believe. And that's what everyone around me needs me to believe. Like, you know, for me as a Black person to go, I don't believe what everyone else is believing. This is not working. Like, that's a huge cost. The cost was enormous. One of her main theses was, we need to talk more about this though, because if we're not going to talk more about it, it's going to remain, people just get stuck in that community and can't find freedom to come out and to talk, and talking is important in healing and things like that. But I did think that's so interesting to me, because I don't really know what it's like to be in that sort of community. I mean, I've had amazing communities in evangelical world over the years, but all of them at some point I was like, no, I'm done with this, and I'm quite comfortable leaving. Like, it wasn't that big a cost that I was like, I can't leave. And a lot of times I was financially rooted in it as well, you know, traveling and speaking and things, and so like there was even that, but I was like, yeah, it's okay. But to lose family, friends, everyone, like, you know, that's a huge deal. So huge.
Yeah. I mean, because I grew up with a Black pastor, but, you know, very much from AOG, you know, Kenneth Copeland was one of our, like, you know, spiritual fathers of the church. It was like, okay, we're Black people, but it's very white theology. So making the switch to Hillsong wasn't that big of a jump. And then after Hillsong, I went to another little church plant led by a Black pastor. And this was a much more intentionally diverse community. So much better as far as, okay, we got people of color speaking and women, and, you know, all that is good. But then, you know, when it came to the treatment of queer people, you know, that's when I had to go, because I was like, oh, it's like, your line. We always find some group to kind of, you know, put on the outside, you know, to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't need this. But then also like looking at that church and kind of what they were aiming for, and it's like, oh, like we can't help it. Like we look at the mega church and we, you know, you don't like it. We don't want to be that, but we do want those numbers, and we do want that influence. And so, you know, we're gonna, it's our flavor, but we're gonna do a little bit more like this. And so it's like, oh, like we just, in some ways, like we can't help it. Like we're just taught that numbers and success and wealth and all of these things are like indicators of God's blessing. And so it's like you start chasing those things and people just become the sacrifice. And then, you know, Christianity anyway, we're supposed to be sacrifices. So this isn't supposed to feel good. It is supposed to hurt.
There's a lot of problematic language we can really grab a hold of for sure. Like, so why do we think blessing is associated with God's favor? Because we were told by God that blessing is associated with God's favor. Like being good, and this is what blessing more numbers, looks like. You will get this. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's not surprising, really. But of course, that's how people thought 3,000-4,000 years ago. You know what I mean? Like they thought if they burned their kids, they would get the right rain for the crops that year. You know what I mean? Like we're not talking about people like. People worshipped the sun because they were terrified it wouldn't come up that morning. You know, like they're worshiping the sun throughout the night. Like no one does that anymore. And yet we're still reading their book, you know, like it's like, hold on. There's some problems here. Or at least we're using the same metrics for what favor with God looks like, or that's funny. I love that you mentioned Kenneth Copeland, man. That guy is without a shadow of the doubt my one, like I can get sucked into conspiracy theories, right? But talking to conspiracy theories, lizard people is not one I can buy into unless you watch Kenneth Copeland for 4 seconds and you're like, fuck, lizard people is a thing.
It's real.
He is 100% not
the king
human. He is terrifying.
The lizard king.
Like, and not even trying to be nice or liked. Like, I'm always amazed. I'm like, I want to find all these grandmas that are just tossing their money at him to buy him more jets. I'm like, what do you like about this? He doesn't try. He's so mean. It's like what you're talking about with the church plant, right? It's like, I'm going to just not be nice and then see if you really want this. It's like a hazing or something to get in on that. Like, I did not get it. But it's funny just thinking of like growing up in that world. Like, because I probably at some point would have gone, oh, wow, Kenneth, what a great guy. Like, look at his success. Clearly he believes the right things. And
Right. And God's blessing him. So yeah, he seems mean, but I mean, he must be on to something. So, and then, that's
some
my
people's
flesh.
heads can spin 360. That's totally, I mean, I'm sure some people that's normal. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Terrifying. Terrifying.
It's deep though. Cause I mean, all the theology, like it's just all these loopholes built in, and you're just kind of taught to doubt yourself. So even you're like, he doesn't seem nice. Oh, that's me. I'm judging him. I'm having a bad thought. He doesn't seem nice, but he's blessed. So God must be pleased with him. So then I got to get on the same page. So I don't particularly like him, but God loves him. So must be something I need to work on in me. Let me throw him some money.
That can be an incredible thing to develop in yourself, right? You're talking about as you're, deconstructing within Hillsong, and you're questioning certain things and going, oh, maybe that's my privilege exposed, and I need to question why I like the guest seats, or whatever.
Right.
And then but then the second it starts challenging something else, it's like, oh no, I need to question it as well. It's just a blanket questioning that done in the right way can be hugely important and amazing, but it's just not possible that the person at the top is ever wrong. That's the system, right? Yeah. The system is, if you made it to the top, you were always right. If you made it to the top, you're God's chosen. If you made it to the top, whatever you say goes, however you see it works. And so if I see a problem with someone at the top, it is me. I am wrong. Me. There's no question, right? It's like, well, why don't I get healed? Well, it's not God. It's obviously me, right? However that works, right? Well, it's not Bill Johnson. It's me. Bill Johnson heals people. Like, that's his thing, right? And yeah, hats off to Bill. Like, I'm like, dude, his numbers are pretty good. I'm impressed. Great. But now I'm left going, well, I'm obviously some sort of terrible person. It's obviously because I masturbate, or it's obviously because I, whatever, like pick your poison. But if you're male and you're in the church, it's masturbation. And also if you're female, it's also masturbation. Let's be honest. But it's these immediate doubts of anyone that's in charge being shut down and then projected onto yourself. Anything that's wrong with them, oh no, it must be me. It must be me. It
must be me.
It's terrifying, these systemic kind of things that kind of are just, probably no one sat down and came up with like, here's like 10 systemic kind of ways we can build an organization that will oppress people and hold them in place. That probably never happened, right? It just slowly evolved over time. We went from like burning our kids to get the sun up the next day. And then before long, like we've got Hillsong, right? And you know what? That's, different. But no one at any point was like, maybe if we give out donuts at the beginning, like, no one like was sitting thinking of that at the beginning. But you know what? I'm going to keep coming for the donuts. Hillsong London gave out Krispy Kremes, and Krispy Kremes were like barely, there was like one Krispy Kreme in the UK at that point, and I was like, dude, when I go to London, I'm going to Hillsong for my free donut. I could have gone to Krispy Kreme. Like, what was I thinking? Right? But I'm like, oh, there's one church in London I'm going to visit because they're giving me a donut. Powerful. Whatever they're doing, it works.
It's the little things. Yeah. And you know why? Because we are not inherently bad, because we are inherently good, and we want to be part of things that we think are doing good. And so we'll find any way and any justification to do that and to be part of it and to keep going. And then to try to fix it when it's not doing what it says it's doing. Like, it's just wild.
It's so it's terrifying, it's sad, and it's also beautiful. It points to our eternal optimism and our hopefulness and our goodness and our desire for change and growth, and to see the world become a better place. It's amazing. It's great as well. Jani, this has been really fun. We should roll out though, because it's getting late. It's like almost 7:00 here. So yeah, my wife will be wondering where dinner is. So I'm on dinner duty. But this was really good. I cook all the dinners. I do dinner. Like that's the one job I can do relatively well that, doesn't really take much. And so I can get great points, in the divvying up of chores and stuff. I'm like, I'll do dinner. Also, I'm really picky. So if I do dinner, pretty much always get what I want. I'll maybe push it a little bit here or there, but on the whole, yeah.
So what's on the menu tonight?
Do you know what? I think we're going to have curry. So I'm excited. We do like huge. So also because I cook, right? I'm lazy. I do one big batch cook a week of 16 portions of food and then freeze it all up. So that generally speaking, we've got like 5-6 meals in the freezer that I can like pull from. So the curry as well, by the way, looks like me putting like food in the microwave, hitting go, and then like pouring some rice in the rice cooker. That is it. Like, it's not a complex affair. So I'm on it.
It works. I love it.
Hey, like, absolutely. It's cheap. It's easy. I'm in for both of those every time, and it tastes good. So yeah. Well, I think it tastes good, and she's not complaining because she doesn't want to cook. So it's perfect. This has been so fun. Jenny, I've loved chatting with you. We'll definitely have to have you back on and chat about more stuff and not get too sucked into just Hillsong, because I know it's one of those things, right? You end up getting like, yeah, it's just a big part of your journey. It's hard to avoid that, but I know that there's so much more as well. I'd love to talk more about your art and your podcasts and different things that you're doing.
Yeah,
so we can talk a lot about things, but tell people, because you're not someone that wants to hide and doesn't want your Instagram found out, how can people connect with you? What are some of your projects that they can connect with? And we'll make sure they're in like show notes and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the main thing for this is God Has Not Given. That is the podcast. You can also go to godhasnotgiven.com. That's the blog. And from there, you can pretty much find anything and everything you want to know about me and what I'm doing. So
awesome. Yeah. Cool. We'll make sure that's in. It's not hard to remember. God Has Not Given. It's .com, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So at God Has Not Given on Instagram. Yeah. God Has Not Given on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. And then the .com for the everything.
Awesome. So get some good solid podcasts that aren't just these boring experts like pretending to know everything about something when none of us know what the hell is going on anyway. Let's be honest. That sounds good. That sounds my meat and potatoes. I like just down dirty day-to-day life. Like, this is what's going on. This is how we're living. How are you surviving right now?
Yeah,
like, how do you plan to get through the next week?
Yeah. And I'm going to send you, some people of color that I just talked to.
It.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. I'm keen to get more and more people, because I've got a list of experts. I've got a list of people that I've talked to on Instagram and got to know. And I'm like, at some point I'm going to have you on the podcast so we can tell your story. But absolutely, as far as people of color, both those lists are lacking. But it's bubbles, it's all that different stuff. So I really appreciate it. So people can look forward to that as well. But you've had them all on your podcast as well, so they should check out your podcast first.
Yeah.
Just get on it. Yeah. All right, Jenny, absolutely amazing to chat with you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me. No, this was so good.
I appreciate you hanging around for so long. So it's good.
All right.
Catch you later. Love you. Bye.
See ya.
If you are deconstructing, there is no reason to do this alone. It can be an incredibly lonely process, but the deconstructionnetwork.com is a free resource to help you find others deconstructing in your local area. If you would like to support what I do, everything I do is for free, from talking to people for hours on end to producing resources and podcasts. It is only possible because people give generously. There's never any need to give. It will always be free, everything I do. But if you do, we do have an amazing private community group that we talk on over on Discord that you would gain access to. And we do regular audio and video chats on there as well. So it'd be great to see you in there. But of course, never any requirement. And of course, please come and talk to me on Instagram. I love connecting with people. I love helping people on their journey. If you need a safe space to process your deconstruction, I would love to connect. It's just at Phil Drysdale. Love every one of you. Peace.